Dalton, let's talk about Kansas City and Pittsburgh. Let's go in this order here. Kansas City wins the game 29-10 in Pittsburgh. I think a lot of people, when they look at this final score, they go, "Oh yeah." I mean, it felt like the Chiefs were always going to win this game, but at the same time, I mean, we're in the third quarter and it's a close game. I feel like the Chiefs, obviously near the end, kind of made this a game where they were able to really put things out of reach. But for as much as the Steelers struggled, it still felt like they were in striking distance, which kind of feels like a Mike Tomlin theme. I'm just curious. What's your stat that told the story here? Are you going more Pittsburgh side of things with the loss, or are you going more how impressed Kansas City has looked, not just this week, but also in this 11-day stretch where they played 3 games?
It's the fact that they're finding the same rhythm at the end of the year on offense that they have the last 2 years. So mine, and I know we're going to harp on some of the same things here, mine is 182 yards after catch for Kansas City, and it's their 5th game this year over 180 yards after catch. The only other 2 teams who have done that are the Buccaneers and the Lions. I think what you're seeing now is the Chiefs just fully embracing, like they have the last 2 years without Tyreek Hill, look, we're going to go death by 1,000 paper cuts. Some weeks they're going to run the ball behind a stellar interior offensive line, and now they're getting in the screen game. They're getting short of the sticks, and they're making plays after the catch. The Chiefs have the most first downs this season on throws short of the sticks. This is just what they do. Look, is Mahomes as flashy as he used to be? Maybe not right now, but there's 4 or 5 plays a game where he still makes the improvised plays happen, right? The Kelce touchdown, the backhanded flip to Samaje Perine. Like this, we still see that Patrick Mahomes, but we just don't need to see it as much. They only completed 1 deep ball in this game, the early one to Justin Watson. They know what they want to be, and they knew that they had the Steelers vulnerable in coverage, especially with the injuries the Steelers have right now. Their secondary is the biggest problem on their entire team. So it was death by 1,000 paper cuts. And I think a big guy for me I want to point out is Xavier Worthy. And I think we came into this season with Xavier Worthy in the 4.2 speed with, thinking, okay, he's the deep threat, and we have Tyreek Hill again. And if even if it's not, constant production and 1,500 yards of deep ball, we've got this deep ball decoy that can open up everything else. And they've kind of gotten away from that. They realized it wasn't working. So through week 13, Xavier Worthy's average depth of target was almost 12 yards. They were trying to get vertical with him. They were trying to use him as that decoy, going to deep posts and go balls, and it just wasn't working. Their last 4 games, his average depth of target is 5.5 yards. They're embracing him more as a short weapon, as a screen weapon. We even saw him on his touchdown lineup in the backfield. 79 yards in this game, 72 of them after the catch for Worthy. They're letting him use his speed with the ball in his hands, and I think it's starting to become an X factor for their offense. So a heavy chunk of Worthy. We saw a good amount of Kelce working after the catch too, but I think the fact that the Chiefs have really found what works for them on offense, and it's very similar to what's worked for them the last couple of years, now they're even more dangerous than ever heading into the playoffs and with home field locked up.
It's funny. There's all this talk throughout the season of what the Chiefs are going to be. This is the worst team, if you will, that they've had in the three-peat. At least, like, that was sort of the idea behind it. And when we were looking at them, okay, they were winning football games in the early parts and middle parts of the season, but it didn't look like the Chiefs we were used to, right? And I think a lot of people were like, oh, it'll eventually catch up to them. There's no way they're going to three-peat. And guess what happens? Well, at the beginning of the year, we wondered what the Chiefs were going to be throughout the first 10 to 12 weeks, knowing that they're probably going to lock in when the end of the season rolls around. It's exactly what they have done. It feels as though the entire first half of the season, really, again, probably like through week 12, 2/3 of the season, they were basically trying to figure out what was going to work. And they knew that they were a good enough team to get enough wins, and they were obviously stacking up a ton of wins. Only 1 loss here now on the season. They've locked up the 1 seed. It felt like exactly what you mentioned with Xavier Worthy. They're trying things out. They were just trying to see, okay, is this the best version of our offense? Is this the best version of our offense? And here they are now. This was their second to last game of the regular season. They've got 1 more to go until what's going to be a bye week and then a playoff run for them. And it just feels like they know exactly what they want to be now. I mean, we talked about the time to throw last week for the Chiefs when they were playing the Houston Texans. And you did a great job pointing this out on the review show earlier this week of, man, when you look at their time to throw, it's so much lower. Mahomes is getting the ball out of his hands so much faster for the exact reason that you said. They're using these players in yards after catch situations so much more than just air yard situations. Well, on Wednesday, on Christmas Day, they took that to the highest degree that we have seen so far this season. 2.33 time to throw average for Patrick Mahomes in this game. That is the lowest time to throw for the Kansas City Chiefs this season. You mentioned the yards after the catch, 182 yards after the catch, which was their 5th most this season. And when you look at games with yards after catch totals in general, 2 out of their top 3 yards after catch games this year have come within the last 3 weeks. So this is their identity right now, and very clearly it's something that's working. Mahomes' efficiency is through the roof. His EPA per play this past week was the highest that it had been all season. The efficiency of seeing what he needs to see pre-snap. It's just there is such in rhythm. They know exactly where the ball is going to go. And even a defense like the Steelers, which has been struggling, we'll get to that in a second, but the Steelers are a good defensive team. They could not do anything about what the Kansas City Chiefs wanted to do on offense. So, you know what? I know people are tired of the Chiefs. I know people are tired of the Mahomes and the three-peat, and there's some out there that are rooting for them to lose. I am really excited to see them in the postseason this year, because there's not really going to be that excuse of like, well, they just, they weren't playing their best ball. It feels like Kansas City's playing the best version of ball that this roster can play going into the playoffs. So if anybody knocks out the Chiefs this year, they're going to do so knowing that they probably got the Chiefs best. And to me, that's what makes for a exciting top-heavy AFC playoff matchup that we get to project here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, look, at this point, I feel like there's 3 teams capable of winning the AFC. It's Kansas City, Buffalo, and Baltimore. I think that's where we're getting, where those 3 are cut above the rest. We obviously saw Houston and Pittsburgh, who we thought were the 2 next best teams in this group, and they both got the doors blown off them yesterday. That's where we're at now. And I think for the Chiefs to have that 1 seed, it's a huge advantage because you don't have to play each of the other 2. It's very likely, obviously, I think almost guaranteed that Buffalo and Baltimore are going to be 2-3 in some order there. They're going to have to play each other and then go to Kansas City and win, whereas the Chiefs just have to play one of them at home in an AFC title game, and they're going to be set. So them getting this locked in, spending the next 2 weeks resting Patrick Mahomes and any soreness left from the ankle, getting this passing game figured out in time for the postseason, they're as dangerous for the three-peat as ever. And it just makes you feel like you get this creeping feeling, just like it used to be with Tom Brady in New England. They're like, this is going to happen, isn't it? It just, nothing's ever guaranteed, and you have to play the games on the field, but it feels like now they're hitting their stride, and, and the rest of the AFC and the rest of the league, they didn't put the Chiefs away when they had their moment, when all those one-score games kept coming, all, stringing together, winning by a field goal every single week. Other teams had a chance to prevent this, and now they're 15-1, and they have home field, and they're in a rhythm. So I think it feels at times inevitable, and with the 1 seed and having to only play one of those other 2 teams on the road to the Super Bowl, boy, it sure feels like they're set up well to win 3 in a row now.
Most impressive for me, I'll stick with the Chiefs, because for my most disappointing, I do want to dig into some things with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who still have a chance to win the division, right? I don't want to take anything away from them there. If they can beat the Bengals next week, and if the Baltimore Ravens lose to the Browns, the Steelers will still end up winning the AFC North. And you talked about a scenario where what feels like Baltimore and Buffalo are going to get those 2 and 3 seeds. Well, if that ends up happening and the Steelers get the division title, then obviously things get totally jumbled up for the Ravens being the wild card. But before we get to that, Joe Thuney has been fantastic. And I think his PFF grades over the last 3 weeks, particularly in this 3-game stretch, really, they're lower, and they're not really going to stand out, and they're not really going to be like, wow, what an unbelievable job Joe Thuney's been doing going from left tackle to left guard. And the reason why the PFF grades a little bit lower is because he's got a bunch of pressures given up. I think his pressure percentage given up is right around 10.5%. So anytime that's the case, like you're not going to grade very well. But it's the fact that he's able to do it. You got to be able to take some context into just the overall grade and performance. And Thuney is a guard, man. And I think that he knows he's doing exactly what he needs to do, especially with the Chiefs' offense set up the way that it is, to say, okay, I don't have to stay in front of this pass rusher for 3 seconds. I just have to stay in front of them long enough and in a certain way where they're not going to be able to get to Mahomes. So even if I get beat on this play, even if they can get me to the outside, even if they can attack the outside shoulder, even if they might be able to get me with an inside move, whatever, I'm still going to hold my own well enough for this offense to operate the way that it needs to. And that to me has been so impressive with a guy from guard kicking out to offensive tackle, facing a gauntlet of great pass rushers that he has faced over the last couple of weeks. And so my most impressive, I'm just going to shout out Joe Thuney, who, again, maybe the singular performance of how we get the grades and the pressures that he has given up, it might not jump out at the screen at you, but the context of what he is doing, I think, is still incredibly impressive and has really helped the Chiefs lock up this 1 seed.
Yeah, I think what you have there is maybe not a case where Thuney is spectacular, but the improvement over what was there actually is what's spectacular. Because if he even plays at a passable, I'm looking at his grades the last 2 weeks, a 68 and a 58. That's still way better than what they were getting out of their tackles before that, especially at left tackle. I'd have to see what the update is, but the last I looked, the only teams with lower graded tackles in the league than Kansas City were Tennessee and New England, and those might be the two worst offensive lines in the league. So as long as you're better than that, it's the old creep back toward average thing. If Joe Thuney's even anything close to average at left tackle and they're still getting decent production at left guard with his replacement, that's a major improvement, and you've improved the one thing that could sink your whole season when it comes to these tackle spots. Now you're asking either Wanye Morris or Jawan Taylor to just play better at right tackle. That makes sense, but one sore spot isn't nearly as bad as two, especially when you've got Thuney playing the way he is. So I think it's a great shout. I'm going to go with a guy we've shouted out a couple of times this year, and he's just one of my favorite football players in the league. Trent McDuffie, just a superstar, honestly. 4 catches allowed for 58 yards, 41 of them on a first quarter go ball to George Pickens where he didn't even have bad coverage, honestly. He was in pretty tight coverage, and it was just perfect throw, perfect catch, everything about it. But they asked him to do a lot, especially when it came to locking down Pickens in this game. Press man on over 2/3 of his snaps, or I should say press coverage on over 2/3 of his snaps. A lot of man coverage, as usual, from the Chiefs. They asked him to shadow Pickens a good amount. He had a forced incompletion on Mike Williams on a go ball. And the forced fumble on Pat Freiermuth with about 11-12 minutes to go, the game was over at that moment. I mean, just what a play to come up on Freiermuth when he's trying to make things happen after the catch, realizing he's got the ball in his inside arm. Never have the ball in your inside arm, Trevor. It's just not what you're supposed to do, and yet I see every week guys still doing it. McDuffie stripping that ball. He's just a playmaker. I mean, he's a shutdown corner. He's a playmaker. He comes back from giving up one big ball early, only gave up 17 yards the rest of the way. Just one of the best players in football. 88.6 coverage grade in this game. Just can't say enough. The inside-outside versatility, the ability to shadow him on a team's number one wide receiver, the ability to play man or zone, slot, outside, just doesn't matter. He's just such a great football player. And I think, I think I've said this before on the show, if you're making a top 5 of corners in the league, I think Trent McDuffie has to be on it for everything that he does and how effective he does it.
I would agree with you. There. My most disappointing, just the Steelers defense in general, right? You get a game where both Najee Harris and Jalen Warren rushed for over 70 yards. I mean, both of them had over 5 yards per carry averages. Was it Russell Wilson's best day? No, it wasn't. But you get George Pickens back. You get the big catch from him, and you're sprinkling in some offense there. And I think that some people might go, okay, well, how are we supposed to win the game if we're scoring 10 points? For sure. When he's throwing that red zone interception, it's not going to help. And the Steelers offense does need to be better, no doubt about it. But the Steelers defense has really struggled, and certainly going down the stretch into the postseason, that's what you have to be worried about, because Pittsburgh was never going to be a team that was going to boat race you on the scoreboard, right? Pittsburgh was always going to be a team that said, we have our defense, and they're going to keep us in every single football game. Certainly they were hoping to host a playoff game instead of going on the road, which makes things a little bit more difficult. But when you look at these last 3 games for Pittsburgh, I looked at the numbers, and grade-wise, efficiency-wise, they're even worse than I thought that they were. Steelers are 24th in the NFL in overall defensive grade with a 58.2 over their last 3 games, this important 3-game stretch that they just had. And they're 29th in total coverage grade, 48.2. I mean, that's just not going to get it done. Obviously, the Chiefs are very creative in how they use their offensive weapons. We're sitting over here and we're praising the Kansas City Chiefs. And so you can't just be like, oh, wow, the Steelers had to be way better while we're praising the Chiefs. You got to be able to give them credit where it's due. But still, like you said at the beginning of this segment, we thought that the Steelers were that next team, like that next tier. And we thought that next tier was a lot closer to tier 1 than it is. Now it feels like there is a gigantic gap between the Bills, the Ravens, and the Chiefs, and then those next 2 teams, which would be the Steelers and the Houston Texans. The Steelers and the Texans are a lot closer to the Chargers and the Broncos than I think those top 3 teams. And so how top heavy this division is really showing up right now. And it's with Pittsburgh specifically because you got defensive players after the game that are talking about how frustrated things are. Minka Fitzpatrick, from what I saw, didn't talk to the media because he's like, hey, there's nothing to talk about. Like, we just got to play way better. And that's what Cam Hayward said as well. Deshaun Elliott was frustrated. Patrick Queen was frustrated. Everybody's really frustrated. And you're going into a last week of the season where you know you're making the playoffs. It's just about going in the right way. So this next game against the Cincinnati Bengals, who are playing for their playoff lives as well, this is going to be a tough one for Pittsburgh, and it's really going to tell you everything you need to know about where this team is going into the postseason, because right now, specifically, what is supposed to be the bread and butter for this Steelers team on their defense is not playing to a level where you'd have faith that they're going to win a playoff game, whether they are hosting or going on the road, which it looks like they are going to do. So most disappointing to me is just the Steelers defense down the stretch, because it feels like it's been pretty strong throughout the season, but feels like they're sputtering as of late.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have any questions about their front seven, but their secondary has played like one of the worst units in football over the last month or so, at least. I mean, they run a lot of man coverage. They don't have the guys to run man coverage. You've got Joey Porter Jr. hurt now, and he was out in this game. I think their secondary is now, I think it's the weakest part of their team now, even more so. We've talked about their offensive line a lot this year, and I think obviously that part's been inconsistent. They have a top-notch pass rush. You're not going to be able to line up and run the ball necessarily on them, but this secondary, and the book is out on it. Get rid of the ball quickly. You know, as a quarterback, I say it all the time. If your line can't protect you, protect yourself. And you can very well do that against the Steelers with the same concepts that the Chiefs did. Throw screens, throw swing passes, throw quick passes, and just make plays after the catch. And their secondary really struggle to tackle in space, really struggle to disallow separation. I just think this is going to be an area of focus, especially at cornerback for the Steelers in the offseason. Their secondary is not good enough to win a Super Bowl right now. Most disappointing for me, I am going to go with the offense, because it feels like there's a lack of, to me, I think there's a lack of depth and a lack of just the amount of answers they have on offense. You saw when they fell behind in this game, even by one score. I think especially in the passing game, I look at them and I get it, the go balls and the deep ball and everything, but we know there's deep ball variance, right? And when that's taken away, they really had no other answer in the passing game. This is a passing game that only works against single high coverages, Trevor, and I think it showed in this game again. Russell Wilson, if I take out that fumble early on, because he fumbled when he was still in the pocket, so it dings his passing grade some, so he hadn't taken off yet. If I take out that fumble, Russell Wilson had a 90 passing grade against single high coverages in this game and a 38 against two high coverages. They just, if you get to sit back too high and you take away those go balls, and they only completed one deep ball, and that was to George Pickens on that perfect throw and catch to over McDuffie's head. Other than that, there's just not much to worry about in this passing game. There isn't. I talked about the Chiefs right now have the second most yards after catch in the league, right? The Steelers came into this game 26th. So they don't make yards after catch and short game happen. We know there's a lot of days. Now, in this game, they ran for 200 yards, but there was some Wilson scrambles thrown in there. Some of that was early. They did have some success running the ball, but I just think there's not enough answers for this Steelers offense. It feels like there's one path for them to score points. It's one actually starts on defense, force turnovers, right? And they haven't been getting them lately. Two, run the ball well enough, even though we know we're not an elite running team. And three, just chuck go balls against single high coverages. So I think the Chiefs showed if you get them exactly in this spot, because once they got ahead, they just sat in cover two. And they said, okay, fine, check it down, or Wilson can scramble. We're not afraid of anything else other than George Pickens' deep balls, and he only got one of them. You can't do that all day. You can't just throw go balls all day against good teams. So I think Arthur Smith, if they're going to win a playoff game, likely against Houston, they're going to have to find some other answers on offense, because we don't see a whole lot in the play action game, and we don't see a whole lot, outside of the go balls on the outside against single high in their passing game.
It's a less efficient and less reliable version of what the Eagles want to do, right? I think these offenses are sort of set up the same way, whether it's on purpose or not, just sort of where we're at this season. We know that it's on purpose for Philly, maybe not as on purpose with the Steelers, but that's what they have leaned into this season, where they are deep shots and running the football. And we've seen what it's, the Eagles have obviously achieved that throughout the entire season. They've been very unstoppable because they got Saquon Barkley. They've got one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Hurts is a fantastic short yardage option for you. And then you got one of the best single coverage wide receivers in the league in A.J. Brown. Everything about what I just said is a little worse, if not marginally worse, with the Steelers offense, but they're trying to run the same brand of offensive football, and it's just not working out for them. You mentioned it's not as reliable. They need to have more answers than just those top guys. The Eagles can do it, but I think the Eagles can do it because of their offensive line, and I think people forget about that when they mention a lot of their stars on offense. So the Steelers, it feels like they're playing that brand, just much less efficient, and like you said, with much less answers. We'll see what happens to them. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video, and if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below, so if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can become one today.